Hi, good morning, everybody. How are you? It's good to see you this morning on this Friday, the 28th of April, which feels more like March. Anybody else thinking the same thing?
Absolutely.
And yeah, it's chilly. So happy to see everybody today. And I see Emilie. And so I'm bringing Miss Emilie Garrelts in. How are you this morning, Emilie?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you, Jenny?
Good, pretty good. So this morning, Julie and I have Michael and Emilie on with us this morning, and they're going to talk to us a little bit about a lawsuit that they filed, just like we talked about our lawsuit against Stillwater Public Schools on Wednesday. We're going to talk about their lawsuit against Edmond Public Schools. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn this over to you, Michael, and let you kind of run with it. And Julie and I will just ask questions as you go along.
Yes, assume we know nothing.
Well, I'm still trying to get some of these files together here since I had that phone call this morning. But I want Emilie. So we parents in Edmond, we sued the local school district to get our kids back into school. They were forced quarantining unvaccinated students and segregating them illegally, separating them and making them do homeschool, basically. Or I don't want to. That's a slam against homeschool. Do virtual school. And
I'll give you this time.
We know virtual school is just a complete joke. But ultimately, what happened is, the kids had multiple back-to-back quarantines, and that did a lot of damage to the kids to where they were out of school 20, 30, 40 days, and it was just a major issue. Emilie was one of the plaintiffs in that lawsuit, and we had a multitude of affidavits and other parents that we could have involved in the lawsuit. We only had, I would say maybe we had 8 or 9 plaintiffs. I'd have to go look that actually testified, but we had 50, 60, 70 affidavits, hundreds of other stories. And I want to have Emilie just kind of start with what she experienced, kind of how we got started with the lawsuit. I want to just give the initial timeline. So when COVID happened that spring, after spring break, they canceled school. And they probably did that pretty much statewide and district-wide everywhere else. So we come back in fall of 21 or fall of 20, and that was AB schedule and virtual school. So you could choose to send your kids back 1 or 2 days a week, or you could just go full virtual at that time. So that entire school year was like that. And that's also when the forced masking was, and a lot of other issues kind of happened at that same time frame. So then when we get to the fall of 21, that's when school came back in full session, full 5-day-a-week school. And that's when we had that immediate spike in COVID cases, which I still to this day will. And if we have time, I want to show the insert to the rapid test that shows it's completely bogus, the testing numbers that they were using, which I sent that email into the school and the school board multiple times. So that is when our lawsuit starts, is kind of maybe that September of 21, when you started seeing just kids just week after week after week being forced quarantined, and just our constitutional rights being violated, our Oklahoma state rights being violated, our civil rights being violated, not just as parents, the children, the kids. And I want to, and I'll probably say this multiple times throughout this podcast, these kids suffered damage, provable in a court of law. We proved it with medical doctors, psychologists, just the testimony from the parents. And these kids still to this day have issues. There's still multiple kids that have issues to this day. And the school still has never apologized. Not one time has a board member or the superintendent or anyone at the school fessed up and said, hey, we thought we were doing good. Obviously now we see that we made the wrong decision. We apologize. Still, it could be that easy. That has never happened. So I want to turn it over to Emilie to just get going on. We had 2 cases. We had our district court case with Judge Andrews, and then the school lost that. Emilie can talk all about that. And then they appealed that loss up to the state Supreme Court, where they lost again. But go ahead, Emilie. I got to get a couple things together here.
Yeah. So I appreciate that, Michael. So when we started the lawsuit, of course, we had children that were in Edmond Public Schools that were affected by the quarantine policy that they had implemented. The policy itself was discriminating against children based on their health status. When you create a status of people and put them into categories and say you're treated one way versus another way depending on your status, that is the definition of discrimination, and that's what they were doing. So they put children into status categories, and based on that, you either had, if you were exposed to COVID, you had to quarantine, and that exposure, I would say, was very vague. We didn't have a lot of information about how they were establishing that, and who was in charge of checking who was exposed to what, et cetera. But the kids that were in the unvaccinated group seemed to be targeted, because they would go back to school for a day and they would get another quarantine, and they'd go back to school for a day and they would get another quarantine. And the policy stated if you were vaccinated, you could come back immediately. But if you were unvaccinated, you had to stay home for 10 or 11 days, something like that. And so these kids had back-to-back quarantines. And, we talked about that in our lawsuit, that it created just detrimental physical and emotional issues with these kids because of the fact that they were being isolated from their peers. They were being isolated from society, et cetera. And we've seen that a lot in just COVID in general, but just having this policy on top of that and separating them out and segregating them out really, singled them out and made them feel it even more than others, because they were forced to stay home when their peers got to go back when these exposures happen.
And it was not, and for sure that, but then just the complete inconsistency of I'm here, I'm home, I'm here, I'm home, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, I'm home, I'm here. I mean, how do you even go about getting your kids on any kind of a schedule? And we all know that scheduling is so important for children. I mean, that's one thing that really helps children thrive is having a schedule. So even just that seems like it would be a real issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And like Michael said, we had over 60 affidavits of parents that gave their stories of their personal children. We had actually hundreds of parents contact us, but some of them were not, were scared, to put their name on the affidavits, et cetera. But just hundreds of stories of children that were just suffering in different ways as a result of this. I remember one of the stories that was in court where a mother testified where her child was having panic attacks at night and having to sleep on the floor. She had to sleep on the floor with him, I think because they set up like a cot type thing so she could sleep with him, because he was having panic attacks every single night because he thought he was going to die. He thought his friends were going to die. He thought everybody was going to die because they had all been exposed.
Oh gosh.
And it was just heart-wrenching to hear, the things that she was going through with her kids, and then so many other stories.
Well, and I want to chime back in here real quick, Emilie. We know parents that were opposed to vaccinating their child, and they went and vaccinated their kid just to make their life easier. I know parents that did that because and they said, look, we just can't deal with we both have to work. We can't be home with our child, for 10 and 20 and 30 days. So it's just easier for us to go ahead and get the vaccine. The school did that. They promoted, they wanted, well, I'm not going to say that. They promoted these children getting vaccines, and they should be held accountable to that also.
Yeah,
for sure. And then going back just to our court case, like we said, Judge Andrews ruled in our favor that they were discriminating against kids. As I described before, if you have people and you put them in any kind of status group, so they were putting them into status groups and said, if you're vaccinated, you get privileges, and if you're unvaccinated, you get punishments. And so he ruled in our favor for that. And so the school then appealed that. Part of that was that our legislature had already put into law in Oklahoma that you are not allowed to prohibit attendance to a school based on your vaccination status. And the Oklahoma Supreme Court said, I don't have to even talk about discrimination because your legislature already put in a law that prohibited discrimination specifically for this instance, for vaccination status. And the school had argued in court that the definition of the word attendance didn't mean that you had to actually be in person. And so what I loved about the Supreme Court ruling was that they actually said, no, you cannot change the definition of a word to meet your agenda. The definition of attendance has always meant and has always been defined as being present in person. And
so let me just mention something to you really fast. If you watched our broadcast on Wednesday with Maria, who was the attorney for the school?
In our case,
yes.
I'm blanking on his name. Fugate.
Okay. Do you remember the name of the company, the name of the law firm?
Center for Education Law.
Okay. Well, it's interesting that you say that because as Julie and I talked with Maria on Wednesday, that's exactly what our attorneys, Stillwater Public Schools attorneys, did for us. And Dana says the Rosenstein's law firm, and I think that's right. they argued the same thing. They tried to change
They
a
changed definitions.
Yeah.
yes, and
Yeah.
basically rewrote state law to make it
Yes.
sound like
And on a bigger
what they want.
And on a bigger picture, this is an epidemic of our schools trying to take on the parents' responsibility. They want to make the decisions for the children, not the parents. They want to tell parents, you're wrong if you don't go along. And they are sending that message to children to don't listen to your parents. They're wrong. They'll mess you up. And that is evil. That's evil.
Yeah. So go ahead. So
That too.
so they argued that quarantine or attendance wasn't what we all know attendance to be.
Right, because they had made a policy that said that the virtual school counted as attendance, and if you look at that, and I understand why they did that, because if you look at that, they were having the hybrid policies, etc. That because in order to get their funding, of course, it always ties back to money. Which in order to get their funding, kids had to be in attendance at school so many days a year, and that ties back to state and federal funding. And so they changed the definition at the Oklahoma State Department of Education for the word attendance for the purpose of funding to include virtual school. And so they argued that because of that policy, that was the new definition of the word attendance. But for our legislature, they clearly did not intend that to be the definition. They clearly intended it to mean the normal, regular definition of attendance in person. There is no other way to interpret that.
Yeah, and if I can chime in one more time here, I can show you text messages to my wife from teachers during that virtual time frame or AB or whatever, where they were telling us, please just have your kid log in today so they can be counted. And so they can be counted as attending. They don't even have to go through any of the course. Just have them log in. I mean, I literally have those text messages that say,
Wow.
please just log your, because we were very upset because we did not choose to have that. We chose for our kids to go to school. And they told us before that semester that you could choose either to stay home and do virtual or you could choose to go to school. We chose to go to school. So then as soon as school starts, they immediately just cancel that side and they just go all virtual or AB. So we were upset. So we weren't logging in. And then because it's just iPad anyway. And when you look at those things in the elementary school, it was such a joke. I mean, it was just a literal, you go on there, you play a couple games. I mean, there was no video evidence, there was no video from the teacher, even at like the middle school level where during the court case, and if you can see a lot of this stuff that we've identified on the Edmond Did You Know website, and that's www.edmonddidyouknow.com. And Emilie was a big contributor to that website. But Superintendent Grunwald was talking about how extensive the virtual schooling is and how, during certain parts of her testimony, and then she would refute that in other parts of her testimony and say that it doesn't do any good. But she made it out like you have a live video instructor and you're in like a one-on-one kind of TV style classroom. And that's nothing like what that entire virtual school was. It was a complete joke. But back to the story. Those text messages, it just shows you just how all they want is money. They just want to show that, hey, yeah, this many kids were in class today, pay us.
Yeah, and I just want to read from the testimony real quick because I have it pulled up on my screen here from Angela Grunwald as she was being directly or testifying in court in our case. So they were talking about virtual learning and they were talking about how it is not equivalent to in-person learning kind of in this portion of the thing. And the attorney asked, would you agree with the others who had previously been talking, with the others who have testified that virtual learning is not as effective as classroom learning? And Angela responded, I would agree with that. And then he said, the question from the attorney was, and that the socialization aspect of public education is totally missing in an environment of virtually learning, correct? And Angela responded, correct. So even in her testimony, she talked about how virtual learning for school was clearly not as effective as classroom learning. They had presented some numbers earlier in the testimony as well, from how detrimental it was versus an in-person. So when you're taking kids out of class and quarantining them and putting them in a virtual learning environment, and if you were in the unvaccinated category, that was the learning that you were offered. Whereas if you were vaccinated, you got to go back to in-person, that it was a detriment into your learning. You didn't get the same privilege of being able to go to class, and actually you were being prohibited from learning just because of your vaccination status.
So I want to ask you a question, Emilie. Did you guys pay any attention to or hear anything about students actually bullying or, I don't know, treating the unvaccinated students differently as well? Because I would think that would be another issue here.
Yeah.
Too. It's that we all know how kids behave. Holy cow.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I can't imagine putting them in that setting and then going, did you have that same, how about anything like that?
Yes. I've heard a few stories, but the one that stood in my mind the most, and of course this parent was afraid to put an affidavit together, but it was a story that she had told me, that her child had taken a picture of their classroom. And this was, I believe, in a middle school setting. I believe, I could be wrong. But the teacher actually was, I would consider, bullying kids or discriminating against kids. What she did is she had 4 rows of students. The first row was vaccinated with a mask on. The second row was vaccinated, no mask. The third row was unvaccinated with a mask on. And in the back, without a chair, standing against the wall, were the kids that were unvaccinated with no mask.
Oh my goodness.
No, there's no way. Seriously?
That is horrifying.
Seriously.
Holy cow. My gosh, I was a public school teacher for, almost 10 years. You could hardly even touch a kid, without going to the principal's office and somebody saying something to you. So I'm just absolutely, honestly, how in the world did they get away with that? That's just crazy to me.
I'll tell you, these kids I can't tell you how many kids off the top of my head, but there were kids that were just traumatized by thinking that, hey, I'm not wearing a mask, I'm going to kill someone. I had a teacher told one of my own kids that because they weren't wearing a mask, they're going to either kill the teacher or kill their fellow students multiple times. That's what sent my daughter over the edge, and she wound up having just kind of a breakdown out of that whole issue because her teacher was constantly, every day she would go in, her teacher was like, put a mask on, you're going to kill somebody. I don't want to point fingers at teachers, but that's just one incident that I know of personally. But I've had other parents contact me and say, my son is being treated this way because he's not wearing a mask, and he thinks that he doesn't even want to go to school because he thinks that he's going to kill somebody because he's not vaccinated. I had parents call and tell me that. I'm sure Emilie heard that also.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, and I also want to be clear that we're not trying to pick on teachers. This is one example in the middle of a whole lot of teachers that were trying to do the best they could. Really, I want to point out that we're picking on the policy. They were having to follow a policy for this discrimination, and that's what our lawsuit is about. So I just want to be super clear. I'm not entirely picking on teachers. That's one bad example that I heard.
Well, but I want to say something about that too, because we put all these people on pedestals anymore. I mean, we have, you can't say anything about a military member. You can't say anything about a member of the police. You can't say anything about a teacher. You can't say anything about pick your, pedestal. But the
Right.
thing of it is there are good and bad people, period.
Right.
Period.
Right.
I mean, it's not like just because you become a pastor, you become a perfect person. I mean, we had a thing on our Facebook page where people are just demeaning Christianity because, there are priests who have molested children. Of course, that's horrible. I mean,
Right.
there are bad people everywhere. And until we finally start stop, because teachers are the worst bullies sometimes. I mean, I know a teacher bullied my kid, which is the reason how we got in homeschooling in the first place. It was a teacher bullying my child that got us to go to homeschooling. So, we've got to stop saying, being so afraid of teachers. The good teachers have nothing to be afraid of, but the bad teachers should be afraid of us. We're taxpayers. We pay their salaries. And if they can't, teach our children without trying to scare them or fearmonger them or indoctrinate them in something, then they need to go find another job. And we need to be very clear about that. So good teachers, good on you. Bad teachers, we're going to call you out every single time, period. Right. End of discussion, because bad is bad. Period. Well, sorry, I didn't mean to get on that, but
as Dana pointed out, good teachers need to start speaking up and refuse.
And that's true too.
If they did that, if all the good teachers stood up and said that is absolutely not going to happen,
right,
it would stop.
But see, that's the worst. The bad teachers bully the good teachers, and so the good teachers are scared to say anything because, and I experienced that when I was teaching too. I mean, oh goodness, yes, there were teachers and you did not cross them or they would get you. So I mean, there's bullying among teachers too. But good teachers, you've got to stand up. You got to put your foot down. You got to push back because you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
Have to.
Yeah.
I want to say a couple things here since we've kind of gone into this point. We never set out in this lawsuit to actually go after a teacher, even go after the superintendent. Personally, this was strictly about just defending our child's rights and our rights as parents within the education system, but also. We made multiple. I want everybody to really understand that us suing the school district was the absolute last measure for us. We tried to meet with them on multiple occasions. Parents would go up and speak, try to talk to their board member on multiple occasions. I had multiple meetings with the superintendent. I know other plaintiffs that had multiple meetings with the superintendent. They were dead set on a policy that was completely political and authoritarian and even totalitarian. They just wanted complete control. And at the end of the day, we had to come together as parents. We had to raise a lot of money to fight, just the district lawsuit, and then bring another big chunk of money to fight the appeal. And luckily we won both of those. But I do want everybody to know this was a completely, the school district did not want to compromise in any capacity, no matter how much science we showed them, no matter how much data that we showed them, I know doctors that personally went and spoke to the school district that said, I'm seeing kids in my practice that are really having issues because of these policies. I think you guys need to rethink how this is going. And they just were complete arrogance, really, on their part. And Emilie and I, we can get into their policy also and kind of go deeper into, I'd like to talk about Eddie Withers and just their every time that we tried to just say, hey, maybe we can do this or come to some type of compromise, it was just an absolute no every single time.
So let me ask you this, though, before you move on, and then, yes, for certain, get into your next section here. But I want to know, and I think most people are going to want to know, how much money did you guys have to raise to fight your own school, to keep your school from treating your children like pariahs and lepers?
Well, the initial lawsuit was just north of 30,000.
Yeah.
And then we needed to raise an additional, I'd say probably 12 to 15 or so on the appeal. So, I mean, we were looking at pretty close to $50,000.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask this. Let me ask this. Who were you were fighting the school, so the attorneys were being paid by the school. Where does the school get its money?
No, so so we were paying our attorneys around the 50,000 that he said to fight the school, but the school's attorney is provided by the district, and taxpayer dollars are paying for that attorney for the school to fight us.
So we're paying for the government to squash our rights, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, I was to the point that, when they did the appeal, I was quite shocked, because at that point I felt like it was pretty clear with all of the testimony and everything in court that there was really no chance for them to see a different side of this, right? And so when they appealed, I personally was super appalled that they are using my own taxpayer dollars to fight to continue to discriminate against children. That just doesn't make sense to me. So you're going to use my taxpayer dollars to fight the fact that you want to continue to discriminate against children. That I just was super appalled that our taxpayer dollars were going for that. We even asked the school board about that and asked them who made that decision. And they leaned back on the fact that they had given 100% authority to the superintendent in Edmond Public Schools for all things related to COVID. And so they said, well, because this was related to COVID, she had 100% authority to make that decision. So she made that decision on her own to appeal the court case. And it wasn't our school board members who we've elected into office that made that decision. It was her.
So,
and that's a good point too. And it's important to remember that most schools, certainly all of the big ones, did exactly the same thing. The school board just ceded all of their authority to the superintendent to take over this nonsense. And I think mostly it was because the superintendent was getting briefed on what the federal government was going to provide in terms of money. And so if they were going to get federal funds, they had to do X, Y, and Z. And I guess the superintendents just didn't want to take the time to brief the elected school board members, who are, the ones that are supposedly standing up for parents. But Michael, you wanted to talk about, you said something, there was a Mr. Withers, or what were you?
Well, I met with Angela multiple times, had multiple emails, Angela Grunwald, who's the superintendent. And according to her, they were just following. They did not make any decision, really. That's what she told me. She goes, we're not making any decisions. These aren't our policies. We're not the ones doing this. This is coming directly from the Oklahoma City County Health Department head epidemiologist, Eddie Withers. Now, Eddie Withers, if you actually look at him, he is a direct transplant into the Oklahoma City County Health Department like 6 or 7 months before COVID happened, directly from the NIH. So this guy worked directly for Fauci at the NIH. He continued to be employed by the NIH during the entire COVID epidemic or pandemic. And so he was Oklahoma City County Health Department making all these recommendations, or basically the way that they push these policies towards us is, they never even said the word recommended. This is the policy. This is what the county health department is saying. So this is, or not the Oklahoma City County Health Department. So this is the way that we're going to do this. So we deposed, and I finally, through just a series of interactions with the superintendent, I finally found out where they were getting all these policies, who they were coming from. This was well before the lawsuit. So these were all coming from Eddie Withers. So first thing we did in our lawsuit was we went and we got a records request of all Eddie Withers emails for a certain period of time. We deposed him for a couple hours, and I want to read one of his emails here. This was an email that we put into evidence, and this email tells it all right here. This email goes back into July of 2021. So this is before school started. This email is to another, this isn't, well, I can't tell for sure, but this email is to a school administrator. So this school administrator is saying, hey, we don't want to have these unvaccinated kids in our classrooms. We want to have quarantines, you know, and she's, or whoever this school administrator is asking Eddie Withers, you know, how do we formulate this policy? We don't want to have these kids in the classrooms, you know, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, this is what he says. This is what he emails her. So this is back before school started in the summer. He says, we highly suggest the following guidance. We are finding that vaccinated people, when infected, show minimum symptoms, but still harbor a large viral load, which translates to the ability to transmit to others. And then the email goes on. But right there, he's saying that vaccinated people, and he's seeing them here right in clinic, right in their own testing. He's seeing that vaccinated people who are getting COVID, they're the ones that are really spreading it more than anybody, because they don't even have symptoms. They don't even know they're sick. And did you ever hear this guy one time come out and say that? Did you hear a school address, you know, this type of information? No, this guy never said that one time. There's other emails I have of him where he's specifically talking about people are trying, other administrators or whoever's talking to him. And the emails we got were specifically education related. So we didn't get his general emails with the public or with his own supervisors or within the intercompany. So this is strictly emails between school districts and him. So there's other emails where he's talking about 658 is problematic. You can't go in and quarantine and mask and do these issues because of 658. So he himself knew
658. Explain 658.
Well, I'll let Emilie explain 658 because she knows the ins and outs of that much better. But that's basically the law that was written up to not force a mask or a vaccine or have a vaccine passport to attend school. I believe that's just kind of the summary of what that was. But anyway, I've got another email where he basically just says he can only make some recommendations because he goes in and he's talking about an administrator is asking him, hey, we've got a kid that we know we've contact traced and we want to quarantine him, but so Eddie's going in and he says if you only say quarantine is recommended, so he's talking back to the school administrator. So he's wanting them to not put in the word recommended in whatever language they're using for their policy. So he says, if you say that quarantine is only recommended, the parent now has the option to send that close contact to school. Just food for thought. So right there, he's formulating the language to not say that it's recommended. He wants it to be more of a mandate situation where the school is the authority, the policy is the authority, and not the parent. So
let me mention something to you because this just might be interesting. So I was mayor of our town at that particular time and during all of this. And I have a master's degree in biology. And I did study virology. So I had, a little bit of a background in this. And the city county health department would send us mayors and city managers emails every single day, if not every single week. and they would say basically the same stuff in that particular email. And the problem that you have here, and you didn't quite hit the point, but here's the point. Everybody is so afraid of being sued. They don't care about Emilie. They don't care about Emily's kids. They don't care about Julia. They don't care about what Julia's husband or her family. They simply don't care. All they care about is being sued. So the stuff that you read is all so broad and contextualized that, you know, they can get away with doing it and sounding like an authoritarian. But then if you actually are to pin them down, well, I didn't really say that. I just said recommend. The problem here isn't with these morons at the city county health department. It's the rest of us who just kind of kowtow and go, oh, I'm afraid that our school's going to get sued, or I'm afraid that I, as mayor, I'm going to get sued if somebody gets sick. No, that's why we are where we are. People have to push back against this stuff and just say, no, we're not playing your game. I'm not doing that. And yet we don't seem to have the intestinal fortitude. I said a nice word. I said it nicely, to be able to stand up for ourselves. And that's where we're losing everything, our personal liberty, the country, the whole thing, because we're a bunch of weenies that will not stand up for ourselves.
Yeah. Well, to finish on Eddie, I'll finish out Eddie real quick.
Okay, so
good. There's a whole bunch of stuff I could get out of the deposition, but the main thing that we use, and this was one of the main things that the judge cited and used to make his decision. So the very last couple questions when we end the deposition here, the attorney says, so Eddie, let's close this way. I just have two last questions just to confirm a vaccinated person can still get infected. Would you agree with that? He says yes. And a vaccinated person can still transmit. Yes. And then he says, I think it's all over. You know, if you got any cross-examination, go ahead. But there again, this was before the school session. This was before they instituted these quarantine policies. We have the head epidemiologist on record saying that if you're vaccinated, you can still get infected. And if you're vaccinated, you're still going to transmit the disease. So it was just a complete, you know, in my opinion, it was just a complete political, you know, show of power more than anything. But for us parents, I agree, you know, we need to stand up for our rights. And all this stuff happens because we let it happen. You know, if there's a huge group of us pushing back, we wouldn't even have to go the lawsuit route. But like Emilie said, there was a lot of people that were very worried about retaliation or their kids getting picked on. And there were kids that got picked on because the way that some of these classrooms were conducted, you know, you knew who the vaccinated kid was, you knew who the unvaccinated kid was. So right there, they were separating these kids once again, and the unvaccinated kids were being treated different. It was just, you know, something we felt like we had to stand up for.
Yeah, and just to kind of tag on to the end of the Eddie Withers thing there. So, and I'm looking at his deposition as well on my other screen here. But you know, he mentioned that, like Michael said, that even vaccinated people could spread the virus, and this is an epidemiologist speaking, right? So he knows that there's really no difference. He also mentioned that in his direction to the schools that he only provided the wording highly recommended as opposed to mandatory to quarantine unvaccinated people versus vaccinated people. And then as we went back to Angela's testimony as well, what I found interesting is that, you know, we, the parents in the school district, were being told that, you know, these people with very, you know, good knowledge about epidemiology, et cetera, are making these decisions. And when was the point that we had to go back to this, you know, time when we needed to be quarantining people, et cetera? And she referenced to her protocol that they created a number that they said, if the numbers get above this percentage, then we will start implementing this quarantine policy again, because at the very first day of school, the policy was not in effect, but then the numbers spiked up, and because people were being, around each other again, and if it went over a certain number, they were going to implement this quarantine policy. And what I found very interesting about that, right? So as a parent, you're getting this information and you're saying, okay, like an epidemiologist type person, the city health department type person said, if the numbers get so high, then that's when we have a problem, right? However, in her testimony, she walks through where they came up with this number, and they actually implemented it was developed by a gentleman named Mike Johnston, and she said he's our district safety coordinator. And so they go on to talk about this person and his background. And does he have a medical degree? No, he has a safety degree.
In oil and gas, mind you.
And what type of degree? And it's a safety degree that you can get at UCO. And then eventually says that, do you believe he has the expertise to make these type of policy decisions? And she talked that he worked with Eddie, Mr. Withers, and Mike has been to lots of training. So I feel, we are just being misled to think that somebody intelligent has been making these decisions, whereas, as it goes on, they basically said there was no basis for the number that they created. And you can even see that. So I have an epidemiologist friend that I talk to, and I looked at those numbers, and I looked at the spikes. I talked to him about the spikes of viruses and how, when people are exposed, the spike will go up and then it'll naturally drop. And he said it's the same curve in every virus when they're introduced into a population. It's the same curve. So we took those numbers across the state, across the metro, across the US, and we took a couple international numbers as well. From August through the time of our trial, which was end of September-ish, I think July through that time frame or somewhere in that frame.
Weekly. We had weekly numbers.
We had weekly numbers because everybody was publishing them. So it was publicly available. It was easy to go get. So we went and got these numbers across multiple things. And some of these people had very strict policies, AKA must be 100% vaccinated. Some of these had, mixed policies where they had the quarantine policies, where you have to be quarantined if you're exposed and da-da-da. And some of them had really lax policies, where it was just do what you feel best, So we had a plethora of these. And the thing that was telling for the judge is that the curve was the same. The curve was the same for every single one of those schools. Edmond Public Schools was right there in the middle of the exact same curve that every other place
regardless of policy, regardless of how they instituted the policy. And we even went out. We did entire countries. Like we had the country of Israel in that. We had every one of the metro schools. We had schools that we handpicked from the East Coast and West Coast. We had a couple colleges in there also. And we had a very broad assimilation of all this data, like Emilie said, where some of these schools had no policy. There was no quarantine policy. There was no vaccination policy. They just continued to go to school. They didn't shut down. They didn't do AB, to schools that were completely shut down, 100% vaccinated students. And you had the exact same spike in every one of these schools. And Emilie, if we could, I wish she could throw up her graph, because her graph is just so, it's worth a picture's worth 1,000 words.
Yeah.
It just shows exactly. I don't know if she can put it up.
I don't know if I can do that, but let me see if I can try.
But in the meantime, I'll talk about some of our other evidence. So we had multiple witnesses, and one of our witnesses, Emilie, that gave an affidavit, she was an epidemiologist herself. So we had people that were qualified on that level as witnesses and affidavits for our kids, but we also brought in a psychologist, and he brought in multiple studies, and he was talking about his own practice where he was seeing just traumatizing effects to these kids in his own practice, just day after day, and just the major uptick. And he was a very insightful, very articulate doctor who just laid it out exactly like it was happening, and just saying, hey, there's a real issue with these policies in these schools, and the amount of kids that I'm seeing now in my practice is just, mind blowing. We had a pediatrician here who came in and testified to, and there was other studies that he attested to. I think we probably had, 5 to 10 studies that these doctors brought in themselves, a material that they said, yep, this is exactly what's happening. Here's the study that backs up what I'm saying. So the local pediatrician also had the same issue where he's seen a pretty serious uptick in these kids with mental and emotional and physical even damage, where they're just having such bad reactions to just the isolation that they're having. And that's an argument that the other side tried to make, was they were constantly saying, oh, well, how bad could it really be to be home for 5 days from school? Well, that wasn't really the case. It wasn't just 5 days, but it was how they were being separated. They knew that they were being separated on purpose because of a health decision that their parents decided to make. There was all types of emotional weight on top of that. So for the school to just so cavalier say, oh, you're only out of school 5 days, how much damage can there really be? Because that's an actual question that the attorney for the school district asked one of the moms. And I just thought it was a complete slap in the face. You have a mom, I mean, no one knows their kids better than their mom. Their mom knows, the instant something goes wrong or something bad has happened, the mom knows. So to say something like that was just a slap in the face. We had a previous school superintendent, Jack Herron. He came in. He had other data that we presented with that had to do with quarantines and grades and some other things like that. And come to find out, after Jack testified, which his testimony was fantastic also, after he testified, the opposing counsel, one of their partners in their law firm, wrote a scathing letter to Jack's school district, or maybe he's a consultant now, but wherever he is, they wrote a scathing letter about Jack. And that's just how low these people really are, to go out and try to hurt someone's career like that just because they testified in a lawsuit, against another superintendent. I mean, that is just absolutely,
bully.
It's unacceptable. It's unacceptable to me.
And Jenny, I don't know if you're able to share my screen. I tried sharing it. I don't know if you can.
I can.
Yeah. This is the chart that we used to show, like I said, the spike. And so the first of the chart is in middle of August of 2021. And as every virus, when it's exposed to a higher population of people, because we're all going back to school, it spikes and then it drops. These numbers here are standardized over population sizes, so it's a little bit of statistical analysis, which, by the way, I have a degree in engineering, and so I took lots of statistics in school. So anyway, we standardized them over certain populations because the populations were all different. We took the entire country of Israel. We took the entire data point of the U.S. We took the entire state of Oklahoma, Oklahoma County. Duke University was in here, and then we had classes or schools from all around the metro area in Oklahoma. And Edmond is this line right here with the gray highlight in the dotted line in the middle. So they're just right in the middle of this, normal spike in numbers and then decline, as with every other virus known to man.
Would you believe that it's a pandemic because they changed the definition?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Well, so we're coming up on 53 minutes here. So what I would love to see us do is kind of get, where are you right now in the lawsuit? What have you gained? Where are you going? Is there anything more that you plan to do?
So, like Michael mentioned, I'm one of the 6 plaintiffs on the lawsuit. We had 3 families, husband and wife, so there's 6 of us. And so we're going to be meeting soon to see if there's anything further that we need to do, but we are still waiting. I believe the school has an additional opportunity potentially to appeal. So we're just hoping that they will not do that, so that this can be over with and we're not having to wait for any more things. And also, very happy with the ruling out of the Oklahoma Supreme Court, specifically, like I mentioned, just kind of standing up for our legislator, that they had the foresight to know that schools and districts were going to attempt to discriminate against children based on their vaccination status. And so they wrote that into law specifically to prohibit it. And so with the Supreme Court majority opinion, they highlighted that. They highlighted the fact that, schools are required to follow the laws, specifically in their state, as well as national laws, et cetera. So very happy with that. I'm hoping that this is the end of that road. I believe they have a certain time frame to still appeal, so we're still kind of waiting for that to see if anything happens further. But hoping kind of this is the end of the road. And then from there, we'll meet to see if there's anything further we need to do to kind of close it out. I don't really know exactly what that will be. It all will depend on if anything further happens from the school specifically.
So let's recap. You sued the school for Edmond Public Schools for discriminating against your children during COVID. Right.
Yeah. The Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment.
Yep.
Okay. And you originally won.
Yes.
And then the school came in and appealed, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Yep.
And then you had to go back again and, fight their appeal, correct?
Yes.
And then you won.
Yeah.
At the Supreme Court level.
At the Oklahoma Supreme Court level, yes.
At the Oklahoma Supreme Court level. Okay. So did you guys when we sued Stillwater Public Schools, all we wanted was an apology. Yet they spent almost $60,000 to keep from having to give a public apology, just a public apology. Did you guys get anything out of your lawsuit?
No, not to this point. I believe our lawyer, and I'd have to go back and ask him, I believe he put in there some clause that we could recoup court fees or something like that. But no, we did not get anything out of it. I mean, the entire point was just to stop the policy, stop the tyranny, stop discriminating against our kids, stop putting them in these situations. And that was one fairly quickly. I mean, not quick enough for in my opinion, because our court system is quite slow, but it was one fairly quickly, and they had to stop, the policy that they had to go back to optional. And so that was, some immediate relief that was given. They fought that, and they tried to put a stay on that until the Supreme Court decision could be heard. And the judge denied that as well. And then going forward, like I said, we won at the Supreme Court level. So the point was to just protect our children. That was obviously the primary focus, is get them out of a situation that was causing them either physical, emotional, whatever type of harm and detrimental injury that, like I said, to this day, there is no way to take that back, out of them. Some of these kids are still in very severe psychotherapy, et cetera, because of these types of policies, et cetera.
Yeah,
So
and we're not talking just, well,
they're able to outlast because they've got all the endless supply of money of our education dollars that they keep saying they don't have enough of.
Well,
Right.
that was in our opinion, that was the continuation. The only reason why they wanted to appeal, because they want to just run us out of money, basically.
Yes.
They want to just step on us, show us, they're powerful, we're not powerful, and ultimately is, they have unlimited funds, basically, if you bring in the ESSER funds and all that other stuff.
Let's say that again. Education has unlimited funds. Let's say that out loud.
Yeah. But I want to say, just, before, as I close here, this wasn't just a very small amount of kids. There were hundreds of kids that got hurt and still have the ramifications today from 2 years ago of what happened to them. There's still kids today that have issues, that have emotional issues because of what happened.
Yes.
So, shoot, I'm an adult and I still have an issue over what happened.
Yeah, well, for sure.
I don't trust anybody now.
I had a meeting with the superintendent just before the ruling actually happened. And I brought up the court case and she's like, Michael, the court case is over. I said, Angela, I said, you're the one. I said, it was over before it even started. I said, we shouldn't even had to go to Judge Andrews. But I said, when he made his decision, it was over at that point. I said, you're the one that decided to appeal. And I said, let me tell you, from a parent point of view, you only did that to just put your foot on our neck. That's exactly what you did. I said, I don't care what you think. You could have stopped that. You could have pulled that appeal anytime. And I said, you're just going for it just because you want to prove a point to the parents. And I said, it's out of complete arrogance is what it is. I said, you have still never apologized to any one of these kids. And I asked her to name, I said, won't you just name some of these plaintiffs and the kids that were hurt in this lawsuit? She could name one kid by first name only.
She didn't even care about who it was.
That's how much my children means to her.
That's how much these kids mean to this school district and that superintendent. She couldn't even name any of those kids.
Sad.
Wait a second. I mean, I'm usually not shocked by stuff because I've almost seen it all by this point in time. But really, in all honesty, she literally couldn't name even really one person in that lawsuit.
The children.
Yeah, the children.
Yeah.
The kids in her district, her kids, the kids they love and care for so much.
I think that's shocking. Yeah. Well, I think it, just like Emilie said earlier, it's all about money all of the time. Because if it weren't, when you asked a public school advocate, how much money, are you really going to need? Because you already have 3/4 of the state budget. How much more do you really need? They'll say, well, we'll tell you when it is. We'll tell you when you have enough. They don't know because all they care about is money. It's if we changed our system from and don't forget, Governor Stitt wants to give them still more. Yes. And the only reason he wants to do that is to get votes in the legislature for his free tax dollar giveaway for parents who want to put their kids in private school. So all of this is political. It's all about a certain amount of power that people get. It's all about throwing kids under the bus for stupid adults who then want to turn around and go, oh, but it's all for the children.
Right. Right. Yeah.
I mean, the absolute nonsensical parody that this all is just obvious. And yet, for some reason, like Dana said, until people are being held accountable and the money stops, all of these shenanigans will continue at the expense of our children. And that's my point. Yeah. If we had a system where it was pay to play, so if my kids went to public school, I had to pay for it, those schools would turn around in a heartbeat. In a heartbeat. It's all about, I get all of your money, and so I don't need to care one whit about you. And Angela Grunwald, not even knowing who is in the lawsuit, is an absolute 100% stamp of approval on that opinion.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Well, guys, thank you so much for being with us today. And Emilie, God love you for being the parent who's going to stand up and take on this system. You just deserve all of our clapping and because admiration for sure, because you and we need more people to be like you, because once we can get a group behind you, then we can really make some change. So
kids need to know that parents are going to stand up for them. They need that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that was the biggest thing for me, because I couldn't have done this on my own. We had to link arms with other people. We had to link arms with other parents, and and having, you know, enough parents to file as plaintiffs, and then having enough parents to help us just with the funding and everything else, and all of the things in the background. There were so many parents that participated in this. It wasn't just one person, it was the whole group of us. And that's what it takes. You have to link arms together and fight it when it's just wrong, you know. So that was great.
Absolutely. And Michael, God love you for everything you do. And why don't you tell parents who are watching what you do for us, and let them know how they can contact you?
Well, I take most of the initial calls from parents into ROPE, whether it's some type of bullying issue or teacher issue, curriculum issue, just any type of issues that they may need help on, or maybe they want some clarification or answers to certain questions. Or I do a lot of open record requests on behalf of parents, because they know that if they do that kind of stuff, they're going to get targeted. And I've seen it in multiple school districts. So I've done hundreds of open records requests, not just into schools for parents, but even into their city councils, into their public libraries. I've helped parents, you know, find out about certain funds that may have been spent on all kinds of things, from sports to bids to contracts. And so I'm happy to do that. And I bring whatever kind of information that I get into the group, and then we have a conversation about most of the people, unless I could just help them directly with something, you know, very simple. And then we'll direct them to legal resources or other avenues. A lot of times I just help parents file police reports, because that, you know, they just forget, you know, we need a documented paper trail of how things have occurred. And without just a simple police report, something that's third party, you know, official, that way they always have that that backup for whatever their case is. But I'm happy to help parents in any way. Plus, we go and speak at a lot of events just on behalf of parents and parents' rights, and what they should be doing, and what their actual rights are. So I'm happy to help anybody. They can email me at michael@rope2.org. If they go to the website, I've got a telephone number on there. They can text me or call me or send me a message on there, either way.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. I've got a baby screaming downstairs. Baby lamb. It's not a baby. I'm not leaving a baby unattended. It's just my baby lamb. So she's screaming for a bottle, and it's time for us to go anyway. So everybody, thank you so much for being on today. And Emilie, thank you so much again. And Michael, always happy to have you on. And Julia, always good to see you. I'm so lucky that you are our partner in this. And you guys have a great weekend, and we'll see you again on Tuesday. And on Tuesday, we are going to have Janelle Shellum. Wednesday. Thank you. Sorry. On next Wednesday, which is the 3rd. On Wednesday, the 3rd, we're going to have Janelle Shellum on, talking about the books that she's found that are not parent or child friendly in school. They're at Edmond Public Schools. So if you'd like to see that, please tune in. And otherwise, have a great weekend. And thank you for joining us. Bye.
Thank you, ladies. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.